Okay, so I guess we'll get this going. Welcome. This is going to be from reuse to global use, the 5-year journey of Scout Radios. Is it actually five, or is it?
I think 5 to 6. Sorry,
Okay,
2018.
sure.
So
On the schedule, it's myself. I'm Michael Connell. I'm one of the scouting mentors for Team 102, and Jordan Lees.
I'm Jordan Lees. I'm an alum from 2017 and been scouting mentor since, and been working on the app.
And we have some guest presenters with us.
I'm Sean Mazel. I'm one of the vice presidents and the programming lead on Team 102.
And I'm Callum, and I'm the design and integration lead on 102.
Okay, so first off, it occurs to me, who's familiar with what Scout Radios is? Okay, so, during one of the presentations this morning, I quickly crammed in a couple of slides. All right, what is Scout Radios? And we're going to talk about where we are today, and then most of the rest of the presentation is going to be how we got there. So, Scout Radios is a web-based scouting platform that is configurable. So, you can create a bunch of JSON to describe your scouting form, your analytics and such. So every year, the team can, change that up, get different analytics, get different, forms on the scout. It looks, shows up like that on the students' phones. And it's used not just by 102, but as of today, we have about 120 teams onboarded. So it's a scouting as a service, like, kind of like a PeopleSoft or ServiceNow. And, not all of them actively use it. I'd say about 60-ish use it. So, given that there's 3,200 teams or so in FRC, about 2% of FRC is currently using it, which is actually pretty nifty. So here's some of the analytics, after the scouts get their data. Just to give you a quick view, this is the Drive team dashboard that the Drive team looks at before a match, or other teams can go into their web app and look at, at the same competition, look at their metrics. And then for things like a line selection and such, we have pages to help inform that and sort by metrics. This view is basically sorting by how many points each robot contributed to a match on average. So it's sorted by that, so you can kind of see on the side. Do I drive a mouse? Yep. How the rankings didn't necessarily line up with the points this year. A lot of years, teams that got good ranking points weren't necessarily great high scoring robots. So this kind of view really highlights that, which makes a lot of sense for line selection. Okay, so that was a very quick background. So what we're going to talk about today, basically the chronology of developing Scout Radios. In the beginning, Jordan was one of the students back in, 2016 you started?
2015 and 2017.
So they would the team would rewrite the scouting system every year, effectively. Hard code everything, customize UI. So, when I came on as a scouting mentor, the decision was, hey, let's try to make it modular. And so that made it reusable. So that opened up opportunities to not fixing bugs every year, you get to extend it. Once you got it working, how do you make it more useful? How do you make it more effective? Smooth and make it easier to scout, make the analytics more useful for the developers. And then when you realize, hey, we could open this up to to more people, you start having customers, bring other people in, and you have to do customer support effectively. Learn how to adapt the app for their needs and things. And all along the way we'll be talking about technical debt. To do make less hacky is a comment that pops up a lot in the code. There's these short-term decisions versus long-term decisions. So any kind of long-living application to kind of we're kind of building off of the previous presentation. Any kind of long-living application is going to have these kinds of questions. And we're also talking at the end there about the biggest technical debt Achilles heel of the original web app was that you couldn't use it at a site without cell coverage. So this year we've been building out a offline capable version of the application, and and some of the decisions and lessons learned there. So I'm not going to recap too much of your presentation, but the idea is that there's pros and cons for trying to if you're developing custom software, of going from, hey, we're going to rewrite it every year. That way new students get to learn, hey, how to build an application from scratch. You get to kind of reimagine things every year. On the flip side, you're debugging it every year, going through the same, problematic issues. Once you start doing, reuse, we transition from, okay, now we take the same code base back, because we put it out in GitHub or whatever, take the same code base back, make it better, But then there's new challenges. Have things like, okay, as it gets more and more complicated, how you train people, to keep helping to support the software. And then ultimately, oh, I skipped over that part. I'll skip that. And so those recurring themes. So 3 things we're going to be touching on for each of these lessons learned. Technical debt. If you try and make it perfect the first time, it's going to be hard. If you make it super janky the first time, it's going to be hard. Where do you find that balance of technical debt? Developers, I use this model at work. The developer's motto is if it ain't broke, it doesn't have enough features. So they just want to keep adding on and adding on until something cracks. So how do you prioritize your wish list? And then in terms of cooperation, you talk about the libraries that people have created and shared. You want to share your code with other people. So that's great. Like impact points. Always great for that. But then, like I said, you have customers to support, and how do you deal with that?
So I'm going to start now talking about our battle days. So as Mr. O'Connell and Mike alluded to earlier, through 2015 and 2017, we rebuilt the app every year. And we encountered a lot of challenges. So nearly the whole app was rewritten every year. And oftentimes we'd be working during the whole build season and not have a finished product by the competition season. And so even though the development was rushed, it would usually be me and another student. In 2015, it was me doing the front end and the programming mentor doing the back end. And even though we rushed to get it finished, by the time the competition season came around, it was buggy. It wouldn't work properly. So there were some times when I was frantically fixing bugs while the other 2 people were scouting. And I had to tell them, no, don't submit yet. Finish the code, restarted the server, and then had them submit. It was a mess. And then lastly, the hardware setup was really clunky. We had one laptop that was serving as the server, 2 laptops on the side plugged into a network switch, all of them plugged into a DC to AC inverter plugged into one of the robot batteries. And we had those 2 students who were one person scouting each alliance, tethered to that one spot, overworked. It was really hard to find students to do scouting. It was overall a bad time. And 2018 season, we decided to take a different route. We aimed to change the direction and to rectify all those pain points, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides.
Okay, so that first step was, and when that one scouting mentor was backing off and I came in and started, I was a parent up until that point. So I kind of, started wearing the hat of scouting mentor, programming mentor. And one of the other mentors suggested, hey, what if you guys, instead of using Java and JSP, look at JavaScript? He suggested the mean stack, Mongo Express, Angular, Node. And we looked at Angular and we're like, wow, but at least we liked Mongo Express and Node, basic web development. But since we're using JavaScript, one of the things about JavaScript is JSON. It's one of the ways that people exchange information over the web. And we thought, hey, listen, could we define, instead of rewriting the UI every year, could we define the UI as a blob of JSON and dynamically generate a page off of that? So we asked one of the students, hey, listen, if I gave you a bunch of JSON, could you make a web page and then when someone hits submit, it pushes JSON with data in it to a server? He's like, yeah, and cranked it out in like 2 hours. That was the last we saw of him coding, but he gave us the core of the app. Yeah, so I'm just leading into that. So this is, I think I kind of, bled into that slide. So this is where, this is an example of some of that JSON. Over the years, it's gotten more complex. Initially it was just defining just the form items. Now we're also defining some of the analytics. For example, there's you can write a bunch of pseudocode to say, hey, how many points did a robot contribute to the match? So the scouts may say, hey, I scored, 2 cubes high, a couple of cones low, whatever. The behind the scenes, the application can compute based on what we define in that, those, the calculations, how many points did each robot contribute? It's kind of like OPR or, is it EPA or whatever, but it's the actual number of points a robot, contributed, which is, immensely powerful. At the end of the day, that's probably 80% of the decision making. So essentially, when we made that decision collectively as a team to switch from rewriting the app to making it configurable, that was a huge game changer. That led us, the first year was hard to build, but then we could, each year just improve the application rather than having to recreate it from scratch.
Yep. And so I alluded earlier about our clunky hardware setup. And so really, when you're going to a competition, you don't want to lug a giant box that contains your inverter and your robot batteries and your 3 laptops and a network switch, and then set all of that up, tie your students down to the stand, and yeah, keeping the software in sync across multiple laptops is also a challenge. It was just not fun. And so the lesson learned was we don't want to have this whole app hosted on that one computer connected via networks, because we can't use hotspots because everybody knows that's banned. So we had to connect directly. Lesson learned, in our case, we decided that an app, whether it's a web app or a native iPhone or Android app, which we chose the web app, either way, something that can run on students' phones is much more convenient, because it was 2018 when we made the decision, and even at that point, everybody has their own cell phones. So yeah, make it a web app that's accessible from everybody's on mobile devices.
Yeah, now there's a bit of technical debt there. As we, later on, as we started sharing this out to other teams, they would say, hey, our regional has no cell service. Does your app work offline? We're like, well, nah, not yet. We've got some ideas. So we kind of put that off for now, because most of the competitions that we go to in MAR, in the Mid-Atlantic region, have cell service.
Foreshadowing is a literary
Most.
device.
Yes. All right, so once we had the app working, right, and we had, we were actually going, following year, was it 2019? We had a chance to kind of, improve upon it rather than recreate it. Now we can try, make it more enjoyable to scout, reduce the friction.
So yeah, if nobody wants to, if using the app is hard, nobody will want to use it. And essentially, as I described earlier, there is a lot of friction and a lot of difficulty in getting the students to scout. Oftentimes, we would have 2 students, usually myself, sometimes myself, and then another student tied down doing the scouting, and then everybody else was sitting on their phones doing nothing. And I was the strategy lead, I think, 2016, 2017. And yeah, it was even hard with the authority to say, like, hey, can you scout? And they're like, no, because it's difficult and it's challenging. And so in the 2018 season, when he came in and we decided to have some fresh ideas, we came up with the idea, he came up with the...
Well, I had seen, when my son was on, when my son was on the team, that Jordan and some other student were pinned down with these laptops, and all the rest of the non-pit, non-drive team were in the stands looking kind of bored. I'm like, well, how do we get them more involved?
Yeah, and so the idea was to do actually what I think most other teams do in this case, scouting, assign 1 robot per man per person, so that a total of 6 people scouting. And I resisted it at first because there's no way, if we're having challenge to getting 2 people at once, there's no way we can get 6. But what we realized after that fact, scouting was a lot easier when you only have to track 1 robot. Firstly, it's easier. It's likely more accurate because it's hard to track 3 robots at the same time. And third, by giving individual people assignments, and in this case, we didn't manually create those assignments. We have some code that automatically generates assignments to the students. It gives them a sense of personal responsibility, like, oh, yeah, I need to scout for these couple matches. And so oftentimes we get much better turnout and better results, as we can talk about later, by making scouting easier, letting the load.
But the decisions there were, understanding that the idea of a scouting app is to collect good data. If you need to get good data, you have to rely on your scouts, so the scouts have to do the job. So the prioritization there was, okay, how do we make sure the scouts are going to do the job without having to chain them to something? So I think that was one of the key lessons there was prioritize the core business need of the application.
And this was one of my own personal lessons while working on the scouting app since 2018 is don't touch production code. I described earlier in 2016, 2017, I was often doing frantic bug fixes, changing the code while students were using it because the app was not finished and it wasn't working. But once we had a semi-working version of the app, I needed to get out of the habit of changing the site code while it's being used. And so there's one time, I believe it was the end of 2018 season, or maybe it was the end of 2019 season.
I think 2018.
It was the end of 2018 season, yeah. So we have some integration with the Blue Alliance to have an API that lets you fetch data like the match information. And so back before, we had to manually go into like a management page and say, hey, check the Blue Alliance for these updated matches. But they have this feature called a webhook that lets you, lets the Blue Alliance send a request to your server when there's a new match update. And so I was like, ooh, this will be useful to do. And so, since it's for webhooks, the only reasonable way to test it is while there's an event.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, oh yeah, our code's pretty stable. There's no way it'll break. I'm super confident that this will work. I updated the code during the competition while other people were using the app, and it broke. It crashed the server. So lesson learned, don't touch working production code while it's in use. This is really important to learn. And then after that, I think we had some discussions about it. I think you had experience. Yeah, you've had experience.
Like in business, they have stages. You have like, your development environment, like a sandbox. You can load things to a server, kick the crap out of it.
Bottom left in this case.
Yeah. And then you push up to a middle tier. So, okay, we'll make sure if we go to deploy, it's going to work. You can use that for quality assurance, UAT or whatever. And then once you're happy there, then
just importantly, even if the code's working on your development machine, it might not necessarily be working on the production server because like the environment's significantly different from a development laptop to a server.
Yeah.
And then
yep. So once it works in your QA, UAT stage, whatever. I mean, some businesses actually have like 6 tiers. We have just the stage tier. Then you can push it to production.
Yep. And then once it's in production, you don't touch it. I'm sorry. You don't update the production until you're sure it'll work. You test it. If you guys came from the previous
testing.
Yeah, testing is really important.
Yeah.
And then once it's in production, don't touch it while it's in use because you know it works.
Okay. So Sean.
Yeah. So one of the things we ran into, right, we kind of talked about this a little earlier. But one of the issues with scouting is that it's not like a robot doing the scouting, right? We have actual people doing the scouting. And because of that, right, we're not going to get perfect data. And we come up against that issue in 3 main ways, right? Are the tasks being done, right? Are they even like filling out the form in the first place, right? Are they being done right and appropriately, right? We have a comment field in our thing for any extra like little notes you want to leave. You can see how that might create some problems if somebody's being a little unserious. And then are the tasks being done well, right? Are they actually scouting it accurately? And how can we like see how, on average, how they're doing? That first task, it's kind of annoying to go into every log and like see, was this actually completed? Was this actually completed? So what they did was they, who made that? Jordan, Mr. I don't remember.
I think it was
that page.
Maybe,
or
yeah.
both of us. It was a while ago.
Both of them made that page.
Yeah, as an aside, often I make something janky and then they all fix it.
So they wrote a page, created a page on our website where you could just see, like, once you're logged in as an admin, you can see just a big list of red and green boxes saying, did they complete this match? Did they not? Right? And so if they did complete the match, if they didn't, if somebody missed something, or if you see they have a track record of constantly missing matches and constantly missing scouting opportunities, then you might want to go talk to them, right? Are the tasks being done right? Right? Previously, the comment fields that I talked about were open for everybody to see without even logging into the app or logging into a team. We had a student back during Jordan's time, before my time, that left a very out-of-touch joke about another student's mom.
They thought they were being funny.
Thought they were being funny. Not good. So our solution to that was make sure they know to not leave stupid stuff in the comment field. It's like the first thing we say when we show them that field. And also make sure the comments are public. So if something does happen, it's not like every other team seeing a very bad taste joke, right? And the third one, are the tasks being done well, right? So how many of you guys have heard of OPR, offensive performance rating? First? Right, so yeah. So if you don't know what it is, it tracks the average score contributed by a individual robot to the alliance based with some matrices and linear algebra and stuff. And so we did the same thing by comparing our results to official data, which we get from the Blue Alliance API. We can create a Scouter performance rating. that measures how much error they're introducing. So if we see a scouter is introducing 15 points of error on average, we might want to go check with them and make sure they're like, hey, are you able to scout? Are you doing it well? Is this hard for you? Right? Make sure we check
Or are you
on
just
them.
phoning it in? Don't phone it in.
Yeah. We make sure nobody's phoning it in, but for some people it genuinely is difficult to track everything that's happening in the match. So we use this system to check up on people who might be struggling or having a bad time.
Yeah, so ultimately, you want to have that kind of audit trail and reporting, on the data that you're collecting.
And speaking of the hosting, it's not a very good transition. Sometimes the cloud, everybody, all tech companies are like, ooh, we are in the cloud and stuff. And there's a lot of overhype. But in some cases, cloud services can be way better than any other experience. So actually, since I think 2014 onward, we've paid just like a regular hosting provider. We've had like a one-core server running our website and our scouting app at the same time. But during 2018, when we had this new server, it got overwhelmed. So we had 6 students, and this was the first time we had 6 scouters at one point. They were hitting submit, and then it was chugging, and so they would hit submit again and again and again. And each time that happened, it made the problem worse because the server kept trying to reload and update the form. And so we learned that like one processing core wasn't really enough. Second aside, the problem was our database. You also want to add indexes to your database, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this. Anyways, we realized we needed to upgrade the performance of the server. And so we were like, dang, like if we want to add another server, that's like double the cost. And with this type of app, with this type of workload, we're really using it just a small handful of weekends per year. And then so 95% of the year, when you're still paying monthly for this service, you're paying for nothing. You don't even need it. So we checked out Amazon Web Services. It's called serverless. So it's a bit of if you don't know what serverless is as a concept, it doesn't mean it's not running on servers. It just means that you upload your code to the service, and then they manage the servers for you. And so in the case of Lambda, I think other serverless platforms like Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud that has a similar concept. Basically, if there's no requests, if you don't actually need the site to be running, it's just a bit of code running sitting on a hard drive. It's not actually running anything. It doesn't really cost anything. And so we're not paying for any of it. But then once you hit a request, then their serverless magic will load up that code, spin it up, serve the request. It'll stay hot for a minute or so. And if there's no more requests, it'll shut down. The benefit of this is twofold. Firstly, if we have a lot of requests, it'll scale up automatically. If you have 500 people hitting it at the same time, it'll set up 10, 20, 30 instances as necessary, and then it'll shut them down when it's no longer needed. And so for this specific workload, it's perfect because it's a lot cheaper because during most of the time we're not using it. But then once we are using it and we're slamming it, it'll scale up perfectly. So in this case, it's inexpensive and much more performant. So sometimes cloud is better.
Yep, cloud hype. So once we moved to Amazon, that's when we started realizing, hey, we could support, twice as many users. We could support 100 as many users, hundreds of users. Hey, we could have other teams using this. So with a little bit of background changes, we started saying, listen, we added a database key for org to set up a process by which teams could come in. We call it early access. So we have early access partners to kind of come in and suffer through some of the bugs with us. But they now can use the application themselves. They can customize it. They have their own user list, their own logins and everything. The catch being, oh, look, we have customers that do customer support. So we have to, teams don't do things the same way as one or two. We've got to adapt that. Maybe they don't have the same sub teams. We have to adapt that. So we had shifted our prioritization into, making it an app that can meet all of our customers' needs.
And so on the train of kind of bringing in more people to use the app, one problem we ran into is being an app that's been kind of worked on for years and years, where new features keep being added. it turned into a bit of a mess design-wise and navigation-wise. So, like, this is an example from the app of just a page that is just chock full
Button
of
hell.
buttons.
Yeah.
And while some of us might know how to use that, for new people who are coming in, it's incredibly hard to navigate. And this is actually an ongoing issue that we have, and we're working to solve. So, ongoing, and we'll get to this later, but as we're creating new features, one of our things we're thinking about as we're doing it is how is someone going to use it? How are they going to get to it? What are they going to use it for? And looking back on stuff currently in the app, like if no one can find it or use it, then there's not really any point in having it. It either needs to be like maybe gotten rid of so it's not causing any issues, or moved to a place that users can actually find and use it for what it was designed for. So looking at all of like people on our team and even people from other teams where we get valuable feedback on how they're using the app and what issues they're encountering as they're using it. And that's feedback we take into the development process in order to kind of clean up our features.
Right. So that's technical debt that we have to pay off now.
Yeah. And another issue we ran into when starting to give our app out to people all over the place is that not everyone works exactly the same as like Team 102 does. So we do have people in Canada, in Israel, in
Brazil
and
Turkey.
Turkey who are using the app, and English is not the like default language there. So one feature that we kind of brought in was it's called internationalization, and it's a way to design the app. So instead of hard coding your strings or your all of the text in the UI in English, we designed and created a system that allows you to easily hot swap the language. So anyone in a different country, since we're trying to go global with our app, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to use and allows either like more people to use our app and to use our app in a way that's better for everyone.
Yeah, funny aside, when you've got teams in Hawaii, Brazil, Turkey and Israel, and competitions during competition season happening in all these locations, there's basically a match happening 24 hours a day for 4 days a week. So it works out that I basically get up at the crack of dawn to get to my job at like 4 a.m. And Jordan is often staying up until 4 a.m. So between the two of us, we can provide round-the-clock customer support.
It's perfect.
But that's definitely a challenge, I think, in general, that if you've got something, especially a scouting app, that is going to be used globally, if somebody says, oh my God, we're at a match and I'm having problems, you need to be able to respond to that 24 hours a day, 24 hours around the clock. So that's definitely been something really interesting along the way.
Yeah, because like if you're writing a software library that like does SwordDrive or whatever, you're not going to have like immediate customer support problems because like that's going to happen during the build season. They might send you an email and you might respond a week later and that's fine. But so in this case, they're actively scouting and the server crashed or something. Thankfully, it doesn't really crash as much anymore because we've got more.
When you say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
So one of the features you guys might have seen on one of the earlier slides was match predictions. So because of all of this data we've collected about the teams, namely contributed points, we're able to get an average using some statistics and by modeling the distribution of scores as a normal distribution, just to make it easy on ourselves. We're able to get an average score that the teams might have, right? And then by estimating them as a normal distribution, get the percent chance that one team will win. And this is super cool, right? You can see, is this match, without even having to look at their numbers and eyeball it yourself, you can just see a number right there, X% chance this team wins, and you can know how tough the match might be. And this was a really fun feature we had. It's just like a neat little fun thing, right? The problem we ran into, right, is that teams, especially in quals, which are just basically randomly picked teams, were like really kind of stacked really unfairly. And so halfway through the competition, once we got enough data to actually start making predictions, we would get to a point where there was this one super stacked team, and because we rounded to the nearest integer, we would get to a point where there's this one really stacked team, there's this one team that does not even compare, and it was like 99.6% chance blue would win or something, but it would display as 100%. And imagine you're the red team in that case, or Red Alliance, and you look at our app, right? You're using our app the whole competition, and it says 100% chance you will lose. It doesn't feel good, right?
So you never know, like one of their batteries might break or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. Yeah.
You could win, but 100% chance somebody looking at your face with all this data saying you will lose. doesn't feel good, right? So we had a member of another team that was using our app go up to Mr. O'Connell in one of the competitions and say, "Hey, just letting you know, like this isn't terrible, but it kind of sucks when it says 100% chance my alliance is going to lose." And so we went in and we realized, like, yeah, this really does suck. And so we changed it so that it would actually cap at 99%. Of course, you always have a chance, right? Some robot could explode on the field and then you split, right?
We changed a math.round to a math.floor.
Yeah. So, and what we learned from this was that because we're not just collecting data, but we're also showing data to people in real time, and they get the way you're not a computer, right? You get like emotions from
It tells a story.
It tells a story, right? So what we learned was that the way we present that data, even if it's technically less correct, is actually more important than the actual numbers we're getting.
And that leads into
The math of the predictions, right? The numbers are super cool as well. And the way we calculate average, right? Because we're in a FRC competition, right? And in between matches, you go into the pits and you make your robot better, right? It wouldn't make sense if we use the traditional mean, right? Your first match of a competition is the exact same as your last match, especially in I don't know how many of you are from FMA. I know New York is a regional thing. Yeah, FMA where it's a district system, and you go to 2 district competitions before the regionals, where there's so much happening in those competitions, right? Would it be fair to weight your first match again equally as your last? And so we use an exponential moving average, which is a thing in finance where you use a constant proportionality called the alpha parameter to how much the newest piece of data is considered versus the last average. So say if our alpha, I think it was originally like 0.6 or something.
0.5, I think.
0.5, yeah.
Picked heuristically.
For our original alpha value was 0.5, which would mean that 50% of our data is the newest piece of data we have, and the 50% of the average is, and the other 50% of the average is the last average, right? So it's very heavily weighted towards the newest piece of data. And the way Mr. McConnell and Jordan figured out what alpha value to do was by looking at a couple graphs online and saying that was, which like it got close. That was actually pretty accurate. Right? You can see that I think 0.5 on that graph was like 70% accurate. That graph's kind of a little unreadable, but that's my fault. It was about 73% accurate at FMA champs, which is pretty good, right? But we want to make it better, of course. We want to make graphs better. And so I did some data analytics because we generate reports of all of the match data and all of the scouting data that we can access after the competition. We can simulate, just like you were talking about with mechanical advantage, right? You can basically simulate new robot code. We can simulate new algorithms for Scoutradioz by using our old data, right? And through that, we found that it was actually better to have a lower alpha value and weight the old averages more, right? Which was super interesting because you think it would actually be the opposite, but it wasn't, right? And so what you learn from that is that sometimes the data you're putting in isn't enough. There's extra data on top. I think when I was talking to Mr. O'Connell about this a couple of days ago, he compared it to AI, how there's hyperparameters that tune the parameters of the AI. This is like that. You want to tune the model so that when the data gets put into it, assuming the data is good, you get even better results out of it.
Okay. So then we're going to touch base in the last couple of slides here. We mentioned earlier the technical debt of, hey, we know it's a web app. We know it doesn't work. Self-service. We'll get to that eventually. Well, eventually came.
Indeed. So, yeah, we alluded to this earlier, but you can put off features for a little bit, but then the longer you put it off, the more it looms over you. And so someone with ADHD myself, it's quite easy to only work on the things that you want to work on because like, oh, this will be exciting when I add this feature. But then the big things, the big problems, like not being able to work offline will nip you in the butt because, because this has been server-side rendered, which essentially means it depends on the server for everything. You want to submit the form, it has to go to the server, and then It fetches the next web page for you. You click a link, it'll go back to the server, fetch the page. And so this works fine in most cases. Most events will have cell service, but some of them, like for example, Brunswick Eruption, it's like a Faraday cage in there. And so you only get service when you run outside. And so we've had these ideas. We've had this like spark twinkle in our eye of trying to add offline functionality through something called a progressive web app. I'm going to go over that in the next slide, right? And so we had this idea, and then we've actually had a couple potential customers saying like, hey, you know, Scoutradioz looks really cool, but we need it to work offline because half of our events have no cell service. And so inevitably, Springside Chestnut Hill was last season, right?
Yeah.
So in Pennsylvania, Springside Chestnut Hill, the dead zone. And so we got there and
Long story short, we used paper.
We used paper.
We suspected it was going to be bad. It was bad. We used paper forms.
Yeah. And so we realized we got to improve.
So when we finally decided to kind of bite the bullet and start working on our offline version of the app, one of our first kind of discussions we had after planning what features we wanted to have was how are we actually going to create this? So, I mean, both Mike and Jordan have been on the team for a while. They have a whole bunch of experience. But sometimes, like when Sean and I come in, we have experience from our backgrounds in different areas. And I actually had worked on an offline app for our local 4-H fair and had a whole bunch of code and ideas of how we could create something that worked the way that we wanted it to. So
we're like, hey, you know what? We don't know what this is, but we trust you. Let's run with it.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so we kind of like laid out some initial stuff. I created a whole bunch of the like basic things of the app, like the form and some like scheduling and assignment pages. And then when I had to like go off and go to school, like
Yeah,
we'll come in.
I mostly took over and then Russ did the last thing. And this cycles perfectly into our next topic. Perfect is the enemy of good. So we talked about a lot of technical debt, a lot of like little hacky things that we throw something together. Like for example, that little acorn that the one student did in 2018 to take JSON and make a fully function form. The majority of that code is still in the code base now. And so that was, I mean, it was excellent, but it was a little hacky. And over time, we add features and that technical debt increases over time. And so we wanted to feel like I had the most desire to do it right the first time. Yeah.
I knew.
I've been writing scientific papers for the past couple of years in school, so I'm used to turning I into we. Anyways, so I wanted to do things right this time. And so I wanted to plan out Voyager with the user experience in mind, plan everything out, figure it out, do it right. But then progress was really stalled. Like instead of just, making something like, for example, figuring out like the API routing, like the right URLs to put, I would spend like an hour figuring out what the right URL to be is. It's like, it doesn't really matter that much. And so progress was really stalled. But then when we had our goal to get this working by Brunswick Eruption, we had like a list of necessary features like transmitting data through QR codes and creating assignments, and then mostly those two, and then also actually being able to fill out your data, have it stored in a local copy of the database on the Scoutradioz phones, and then use a QR code to have a scan. But the core functionality wasn't working until like the night before Brunswick Eruption. And so I was like staying up really late trying to fix that. And so in doing so, as the deadline kept coming closer, the solutions to all those problems became more and more slapdash and hacky and added technical debt. And we're going to have to deal with that later. We might have to rewrite that code that we spent time on. I spent mostly time on later. And so really, the pendulum kept swinging back and forth. And so we really want to have it meet somewhere in the middle. Lesson learned is don't spend too long trying to get it perfect the first time, because firstly, you need to have some kind of working version to get feedback. We got some very valuable feedback by having it working. And secondly, it's fine to have a little bit of technical debt if it means you get progress, like the tortoise and the hare. We were kind of like the hare, where it starts off like really slow and then jumping, and tortoise that keeps steady progress wins the race. And so, yeah, a little bit of technical debt is a good thing.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, so that's the basic lessons, where we are with Scout Radios at this point. I want to have a little bonus slide because, I often hear from other teams, scouting culture, they have trouble getting people to scout and such. So we've got and I think this has been covered in the slide, the talks earlier today and such, but, scouting culture is a thing you inculcate right from the get-go. At 102, somebody else said this during one of your presentations, everybody has a job. If you're not in the pit or drive, you're scouting. It's whether you're a freshman or a senior or whatnot. The app, we talked about making the app as frictionless and as easy to use as possible. People can just use their phones. They have assignments. They scout for a while, then they have a break. So we've gotten to the point where, parents come, alumni come, they're like, hey, can I scout? Can I help? And people want to scout, which is, really great. We talk about those metrics. We offered up some, gift certificates to our scouts in one competition. Hey, if you guys, hit 100% coverage, I've got a gift certificate here. I had to hand out 4 of them because 4 scouts had 100% coverage. People just, so it's really about, inculcating that culture right from the get-go. Don't make it a chore. Just let everybody know this is what we need to do, and it's important. All right. So basically, that's where we are today. The journey continues. Another view of our drive team dashboard there.
of our metrics.
Yeah, so just generally thoughts to keep in mind as you embark on this kind of stuff. As you say, okay, we want to build custom software and then bring it over year to year, long term. So this ties into what you were talking about. Leverage the resources you have. What are people's strengths? Listen to feedback. Accept new ideas. Make it easy to maintain. That's something that we're finding somewhat challenging. As this becomes like an enterprise web application, the kind of stuff that I develop at my job, how do we bring new students in onto that? So that's still a lesson that we're trying to work through.
Yeah, and something important too is being open to new ideas, because, well, firstly, like if you make something and you can be really proud of it, but then if somebody comes in and gives you negative feedback, you might be inclined to get a little defensive, like, oh, this is my thing. I feel proud of it. Why are you attacking my thing? But it's important to take constructive feedback, and then if somebody gives you an idea of how to do something better, be open to that. And so that's what I think has become one of the strengths of Scoutradioz. It's become, no one person has touched the entire code base. Like Mike is really good at numerical analytics. Also have just gave some of the I think the best core ideas of Scoutradioz. I'm good, I think, at polishing a lot of things that have happened.
Svelte?
Yeah, Calvin brought in Svelte.
Analytics?
Yep. Progressive Web App.
Yeah, other students in the past. Yeah.
Jinx. Other students in the past have added their own contributions too. And so it's, you have a long legacy, and then have each person add their own bit of spice to it, and it becomes like a nice stew, a tasty stew.
Okay, so just in conclusion, once you make something cool, absolutely share it. Cooperation, is great in this program. People like all kinds of the Swerve libraries, the pathfinding libraries, the modeling libraries. If you make something that works, definitely share that out to the organization. You're going to get feedback. Some of it's going to be constructive criticism. Accept that and work with it. That's great. Technical debt, take some risks, but don't overdo it. Calculated risks. And
lastly, the most important lesson of all, don't update production code in the middle of the event.
Yeah, definitely important lesson. All right, so how do I get the thing to do the thing?
Here. So 2 things.
Before you get that. All right, so.
Ready?
Yeah, so basically, we want to touch base and sort of, I want to do a shout out to some of our early access partners. I talked to some of the folks before the meeting. When we first started sharing this out, I think the first season we had 4 teams using it. By now we've got like 100 teams onboarded, 130 or something, of which maybe 60 or so are actively using this thing. So and relying on us. So that's a burden, but also, they've been great for us. They give us great feedback. So I want to shout out to all those teams. We're going to make a credits page on the app because we're shortly coming out of early access.
Yep. Season of 2024.
Yep.
It's kind of where are we? Pardon me. Okay, we don't have sound effect. Here's There's the confetti.
All right.
Coming out of early
Coming
access.
out of early access, which isn't going to change a dramatic amount about using the application. Teams are still going to sign up the same way, but we do want to, like I said, we want to make sure that we give thanks to those teams that came in early on and suffered through the black and blue with us.
And I want to mention something that I feel like really proud of. It feels like a great accomplishment. Is so we as a team visited Worlds last year, not because we qualified, but to experience it, to show the students and all of that. And we took time to meet all of the teams that have been using Scout Radios at the competition. How many? Like five?
I think
six, seven?
5 fields.
Five
Five of the 8
fields.
fields, people
A
were
decent
at least
number.
one team was on each of those fields.
Yeah, and from I think 1 or 2 teams told us personally that like they got to Worlds because of the data that they collected using Scout Radios, and so because they were an alliance captain, and then they made their pick, not necessarily the next one down, but the team that would fit best for them using strategy, and so it was really great to hear that like the software we made, the service we're giving them for free, has improved the situation and gotten them to Worlds.
We forgot to mention, by the way, this is a free service.
Yeah.
In part because we use the Blue Alliance data, the first data. We can't really charge for that anyway.
Yeah.
Suppose you could take donations.
Yeah.
And then you talked about some of the contributions. Some of the members from these teams have actually contributed to the code base. The long-term goal would be to, I think, kind of where you were going, to move this into more of a, like the way the Blue Alliance is maintained as a community-supported project. So we're trying to shift into a community-supported model. But that's it for that presentation. So we got time for Q&A, I think. I think we're basically on time.
Yeah. Any questions?
So is this app free? Is this app just
Yep.
Yep.
And it's we do the hosting. It costs the team, I think, what, $20 a month. So
No, way less than that.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, including Mongo, including the Atlas.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The database. We recently updated the database, and so we do have a fixed cost per month.
But basically, the service, if you want to come to scoutradios.com and you go through and you find the early access partner form, you sign up and you use the web service. You don't have to install any servers. You don't have to buy any hardware. You have to maintain any code unless you want to.
Yep.
We would love people to contribute, obviously, but you don't have to. So it's scouting as a service.
So something worth mentioning though is that the code's open source and it is possible to host it yourself. Though the Scout Radio's name, you might have noticed in the first slide, we've applied for a trademark of the Scout Radio's name. So if anybody does host it themselves, they'll just have to take out the specific Scout Radio's branding and then just brand it with something else.
Yeah, and it's a GPL. So if you guys haven't heard of the Affero GPL, if you look at like Amazon, they took a lot of GPL code, created web services, and because they're not sending you the source code of what they've modified, they don't have to share the modifications they've made. So people came up with the AGPL, which basically means, hey, that's a web service GPL. If somebody takes our code, modifies it, makes a web service, they still have to share the source code, the modifications. They still have to share that back to the community. A lot of companies don't like the AGPL because they have to share everything. We like it because we're FRC first, right? We want to share everything, so we're good with that.
Yep, we want to share it, and then we want to have the other people who take it also share what they've done with it. So yeah.
One, I just want to say that this is super cool, both as like a scouting tool and also as like an interesting software engineering problem. It's actually a lot of people need to discuss providing this day job.
Yeah, a lot of very familiar. Across any team.
So I've definitely found myself, for context, for my scouting panel, this usually does like Google Sheets or with data storage and analytics and stuff. And one thing I really like with Google Sheets is how easy it is to sort of change things on the fly. Meaning, it's a lot safer to change code on prod when you can just Control Z and back to how it was. How do you handle when someone's at a competition, they realize that you read the game wrong, and something you didn't think would be that important in your data is actually pretty important in sort of refiguring things to get what you need.
So, part of that can be remedied through the JSON scouting form that we talked about. So, it can become an issue if you change like some of the data from the questions, because basically after a scouter knows the form, each element will have its own ID. and then once it's submitted, the data chunk in the database has just that ID and then the value. However, we talked about they're called derived metrics, and so that is like the pseudocode that does addition and subtraction and stuff to create the output. And so that can actually be changed in the middle of the competition.
Or you can also add attributes. If you say, "Oh, we forgot to track this thing," you can add that to the form right from the get-go, and then as soon as somebody reloads the page, they see that form element added on. You can also people have deleted elements in the forms.
Yeah. And also the form. Sorry, when you show the tables, if you have every single metric enabled, the table becomes huge. So we actually, by default, have a lot of the questions, even the sub-derived metrics, disabled. And there's a page that lets you enable or disable certain columns.
Yeah, so that view back here.
Yeah. That table can go on for like 2 widths.
Yeah, so you can customize the columns you see, because under the covers, the numbers of metrics are actually gazillions, because our strat lead wanted to have everything tracked, but then he only selected the ones that were really key. This is and we've got customization so that you can have a team customization, then users can override the customizations and.
Yeah, but it is fair that Google Sheets it is much more flexible in terms of that, and it's interesting because when we moved from the old scouting system, which we used SQL, and so you had to rigorously define your database and schemas way beforehand, and so we switched to something called MongoDB. For those who don't know, it's different from SQL because SQL is kind of like it's like a table database, but you have to strictly, this is an integer, this is blah, blah, blah. But with Mongo, everything's just a JSON object. And so if you want to change some stuff, you can change some stuff without having to worry about it. So we're kind of in the middle, I guess, between something like the Google Sheets and something like SQL.
One of the things we don't have, and that's something that I guess once a student comes along who really wants to tackle this, defining that JSON can be, it's like learning a little programming language. People have often asked, hey, is there a WYSIWYG? Is there a way to
what you see is what you get.
Yeah, can we just drag and drop things onto the form? We're like, that's a great idea.
And that is
gotta find somebody who.
That's one of those really hard things we've been pushing off for a while. Just
yeah,
it's still a problem.
If anybody in the community wants to jump in and help us with that, we're all for it.
Any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So the style coding that you do for sort of an enterprise-like piece of software that's going to be around for years and years, lots of people work on it. It's very different from sort of a one-off, one season's robot code, or if it's scouting out for one season.
Right. I'm going to answer. We're in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously it's hard to get there as I see in my day job. I'm kind of curious how you foster those skills and that mindset in students who have not had that experience of working in that type of base.
That's
Any type of code base.
That's actually one of the challenges we're still dealing with because it's getting to be a really large code base, and so it's we're still trying to figure out how to make it easier for students to go in. And so right now with Voyager, which is the offline app that we've been doing, we're currently trying to get students interested, make it a lot easier for students maybe make a single page and then have their contribution go into the app because Scoutradioz as it is, it's kind of huge, and so that is a challenge. Having somebody go in and then make a small
because incremental changes are the way to onboard students. I put up here, we've done a technical if you guys look at the presentation, if they share it on the website. The rest of the deck is kind of going through the technical details if we had any technical questions. But explaining all of this to somebody who's brand new to programming, let alone JavaScript or Node or whatnot, it's like a college course or maybe several college courses.
Several.
So that's definitely a challenge. How do we bring people in? So incremental bug fixes, making a minor feature change. That's the way to kind of get somebody. The first hit is free, so to speak.
And also one thing that I did recently, which will hopefully help in the coming build season, is I just created a demo. So in Voyager and in the code space, we're using Svelte Kit, the JavaScript framework, and so I just made an example of adding another page. So we had a completed matches page in we're calling it the mothership, the regular Scoutradioz, and so I was just going through the steps. Demonstrating my thought process of, I need to add this needs to be changed step by step to show them what kind of thinking you have to go through and where to find the code responsible for X, Y, or Z in order to accomplish what you need. So in that case, I feel like that can hopefully help. But yeah,
You have more questions?
Of course.
Go,
Yeah.
keep going until somebody else raises their hand.
Please, if you have a question, I can go all day.
We have 3 minutes left, so get that bubble.
Testing. QA. Is there like any automated regression testing or anything along those lines, or is it all?
Automation.
well, we have a very little bit.
Oh, okay. Take it back.
Yeah. So we have one testing page, and I spent like an afternoon or maybe 2 afternoons setting up. I think it was called QUnit, or
Yeah.
yeah. And I did it for the login page, but then I didn't do any more automated testing. So really, what we do is really before a competition, when there's a new code change, we go into QA, and then we just go over the main hits of downloading matches from the Blue Alliance, just making sure we have the schedule, generating the assignments, going through each assignment, logging into somebody else, and then making sure the form loads and making sure the data saves, and just I think it's called in the industry smoke testing, and you just go through it manually just to make sure everything works.
We also, when we train the scouts before competition, before we actually go to competition, they use the QA site, so they load the pages, they hit things and such, and that, theoretically would be an early indicator if something goes wrong.
Oh, something worth mentioning is in this case, we have the database is completely siloed. So the production database is prod, and that doesn't really, we don't want to change that. And then every so often we clone prod back into QA and back into test. So you can make whatever changes you care about QA without worrying about destroying anything. That's important on the topic of staging.
So you
Got another minute?
got probably like a minute and a half.
Yep.
Anything else?
Any other questions? More questions?
1 minute.
Don't feel like.
Wait, we got a question in the back.
Okay.
So Scoutradioz.com. Do we have a little? Actually, we have business cards out here. Like,
Awesome.
Yeah, so Scoutradioz with a Z. Yeah, did you start with the styling for Crescendo?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But we're ahead of the game so far with Crescendo. But if you guys see I'm not sure if you can see the URL up here. But once you go to that landing page, it's got some buttons and things. If you put down the interested in learning about it, it's got, again, this sort of landing page. I've seen other apps that people share that have much more pretty and user-friendly sites. This gets back to Callum's point that we haven't had a web designer, somebody with web design passion on to help clean this up. Yep.
yes.
I mean, yeah, it's got bugs, but I mean, but
So it's been generally pretty stable. And
yeah,
so,
I mean, 60 teams are using it, and teams have gone to Worlds with it, so it does most of the job.
Yeah.
There's most of the questions are, hey, can you tweak this? Can we change how assignments are done to meet what our team does? And so those are things that are on the wish list.
and yeah, having the early access partners has been really valuable. But we've just noticed that were we at Brunswick Eruption? We were at another event recently, and we didn't even notice that another team was using Scoutradioz at the same time because they didn't mention anything. They weren't having any issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we have the early access partners. First to share, but secondly to have them help us make sure the app works. So at the moment, it's quite stable.
Voyager, that's going to be
Not so
beta.
much.
Yeah.
We're done. 250.
Okay. All right. Thank you so
all.
much, guys.
Yes, yes, something. Oh, yeah. By the way, so